Hi, welcome to the tea table. I am so happy you have joined me today. And I am thinking about a very special city we all know about, and that city is Paris. And I'm thinking of France today. And as I gathered my tea things, in fact, if you haven't gotten your cup of tea yet, you can push pause and go get your cup of tea, and I'll be right here waiting for you. Okay, now when I think of Paris and I think of having tea in France, I think about black, gold, and pink. And they have lovely china, of course, all the countries do. And this cup I found today is black and gold, but it has a pink rose. Goes with my pink rose. And I think it looks so French. And I found this teapot, which is rather heavy. And it is black and gold, and I'm going to pour out. And I have a mix of black and Earl Grey Ahmad tea. Very lovely tea. And I've heard it said that the Queen likes Earl Grey for afternoon tea. And we'll have a little splash of milk. And I found this little pink pitcher that I thought looked so, I call this French pink and French green. It's a rich pink and a very rich green. And this is a special little thing. It's tea for one that a dear friend of mine gave me years ago, and I thought it was so pretty I wanted to show it to you. And this is the pot, and then this is the cup, and it sits on a lovely saucer. It's very delicate. It's a very delicate little set, and I have only used it a few times. I'm always a little afraid I'm going to break it, but I thought today I want to show it to all of my tea friends, and let's have a try and see what this is like. Oh my goodness, that's the best yet. That is the best yet. Oh, I hope your tea is good. That is absolutely delicious. And you know, when you go to Paris and have tea, there are many places. Probably the most wonderful place to go, which I have never been, would be the Ritz in Paris. And they have a tremendous high tea there I have read about. But when I was traveling in Paris, I was a young student, and I was, it was in those days called a train pass. And we were traveling through as many countries as we could in 2 weeks. That was my Paris. But I had quite a lovely experience there. The thing about the French is they never want to speak English, at least in those days. They would pretend like they couldn't speak English. And my French was very limited, you know. Bonjour, au revoir, oui. And it was a real experience getting around. And we ended up, my friend and I ended up at a restaurant. And the most lovely French lady came over to us and introduced herself, and she told us all about Paris. And she said, you know, in Paris, you go out to see and to be seen. You don't necessarily converse. Your appearance is your message. And I thought that was so lovely. And then she took us in a taxi and took us on a little tour, and it was so kind of her because we did not have an official tour. And I believe we went to the Louvre and we saw the Mona Lisa. And the one memory I have very strong was walking up the main street where all the designer perfume studios are, and buying soap. We bought the most wonderful soap there. So reasonably priced and so wonderful. French milled soap is the best. Well, when you go to tea, you want to have the right hat. Now this is my little hat with a veil, and that's why I chose it for Paris. I thought it would be very appropriate, and I thought I need a little purse. Now this is a tortoiseshell reproduction little purse that probably would have been made out of Melané in its day, and it has a chain so it hangs nicely from the shoulder. And I just thought this is my Paris purse for today. Now I went around my house and I found I had a lot more of Paris in my house, or French, than I really realized. And I found these wonderful busts of Josephine and Napoleon. And they are made in France. They're official. I believe they may even work as bookends. But I like them just as standing as, I have a little French corner, and I have them there. And then this is my little Eiffel Tower with the French flag. It's just kind of fun, ornamental. And I found that I had spent quite a bit of time in French-speaking Switzerland. You know, Switzerland has 3 sections. They have the French-Swiss Alps, they have the German-Swiss Alps, and then they have a small corner of the Italian-Swiss Alps. And everyone in Switzerland speaks English, so that was very easy to get around. But I ended up in the mountains above the Rhone Valley, came around Lake Geneva on the train, got off at Chillon, that famous castle that sits on Lake Geneva, or sometimes it's called Lake Leman. That's the old name. And then we got on a red bus that went up the mountain, and we were visiting a center called Le Brie in Waymo, a little village. And the only thing in the village was one little church, and in the center was the water spout where they brought the cows every day, twice a day. And the only sound in the village was church bells and cowbells. And then one little tiny store that sold, very minimum items. I remember getting yogurt there, but only open for a few hours a day, more of an emergency store. And then if you continued up the mountain for a few miles more, perhaps 5 miles more, you would get to the top, and that was the famous ski village of Villars. Well, I was in this area in the autumn, in September, and my dear friend and I were traveling, and we ended up loving it so much, we thought we would try to stay there and do some study with the late Francis Schaeffer. He was a Christian historian, lecturer, Christian apologist, and had created this unique community in the center of the Alps where people could come from all over and get their questions answered about God and truth and philosophy. It was very philosophical. So there were a lot of college students, a lot of professors, college graduates, very interesting mix of people from literally all over the world. And my friend and I, I had never heard of this place. This was like one of my big miracles, because we had a friend that said, you should go visit Le Brie. Well, when we got there, we discovered that you're supposed to schedule yourself to stay well in advance. well, we hadn't done that, and their waiting list was too long. But the man that was kind of helping with the housing there, he was married to Francis Schaeffer's daughter, John Samion. He said, well, there's a little chalet right up there. It was right above L'Abri. L'Abri is like a collection of like 5 or 7 chalets that they have the students stay in. And then there is a house, mother, and father for each one. And they have their meals together, and then they'll have lectures, study, discussion. And then they have one chalet, which is, they turn it into a chapel on Sunday. They have a pipe organ in the wall, they open up. But during the week, they use it as a lecture hall. So he said, you know, there's a little chalet up there. I know the man who owns it, called Chalet Le Troglodyte. And it was a one-room, classic, typical, old, beautiful chalet. One room, one little kitchen, one little bathroom, a front porch covered, that's all. And in the living room, it's all so logical. They had a large couch that pulled out as a bed, one large table by the window, which served as our desk during the day and our table for eating. And the little kitchen had everything you would need, little cupboard, little stove, little refrigerator. Well, we just, and there was even a cat that came with it, a lovely little fluffy cat who loved us, and we loved this cat. And lo and behold, the man said yes. Well, we ended up staying there for 7 weeks. And we were there in the autumn when all the autumn leaves in the Alps. There, I don't know if all of the Alps are like this, but this area had maple trees and gorgeous autumn leaves we would walk through, and then all the beautiful pine and fir, very much like the Pacific Northwest, where you get these autumn deciduous trees in front of the evergreen trees. It's like framing a gorgeous picture. So then we stayed there through October, and then in November, we were there for the first snow and saw all the winter wonderland of the Alps. It looked over the Rhone Valley, and I learned something interesting because I come from the Pacific Northwest, where we have Puget Sound, and we have ocean, we have bay, we have lakes, rivers, streams, lots of bodies of water, and I love that. I'm very accustomed to that. However, we also have mountains around us, but I live in the water area, so I'm more accustomed to smelling that salt air, and you know, you get used to it, you love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful feeling in the air, clean air. But I discovered that living in the mountains is equal in drama and beauty. The mountains constantly change. The clouds change, the mist comes in, the rain comes, then the snow comes, the sun comes, and every day it is a constant painting before your eyes being changed. I felt so privileged to have the opportunity of living in this wonderful place and learning so many beautiful things from Francis and Edith Schaeffer. They were there at that time, and they were still alive. They've both passed on now, but it is just a gift that God gave me. Well, that was one of my really French experiences, that you start breathing that. When we first came to the little Waymo, there was one pension, which is like a bed and breakfast, or like in Germany, they call it a Gasthaus. A pension is like an actual home where people rent out a room. Well, I remember Madame Rocher, this little French woman, came to us. She couldn't speak English. We gave her the money. She counted it out. We went to our room. This was the night before we got the Chalet Le Troglodyte. And then I noticed she had a cow on the first level underneath the house. There were cows. And then there was her level where she lived with her family. And then the next level was where they rented it out. Very, very clever and very logical. Very practical. It worked, you know. And so then I started thinking, well, you know, when I think about the French and I want to give an actual talk on French history, but I'm not going to go there today. What I want to talk about is another area that on the same trip when I was in Paris and on this, because my trip as a student traveling on my train pass was different than the one to Le Brie. But I had a voice teacher from the Seattle area, from my college that I knew had moved to southern France, and we had corresponded. She invited us to come. So we had our train pass and went down to the southernmost tip of France on the Mediterranean, a little town called La Ciotat, just a little south of Marseille. Well, when we got there, Mrs. Pincosi, that was her name, she had two little boys, and her husband was working there as a French, in the scientist. He's a scientist, and he was working in the university there. That's how they ended up there for a year. She was expecting her third child, and the day we got there, the next day, she had the third child. Well, what do you think we did? We stayed a week at least and took care of her other children, took care of her. She kept saying, "You are angels sent by God." So that's what we did, and it was so wonderful. And she was a musician. She was my voice teacher at college. And we went to church together. And they were a part of a very small French evangelical church. And she said, "Susan, I want you to sing." So I had written a song called "Jesus, Your Name is as an Ointment." And I've written a lot of songs, and when you write music or songs or poetry, it's hard to know what your best songs are. But that was one song that everyone really liked, and so I thought, I will sing that. She said, "Let me translate it into French for you." So she transcribed it into French, and I sang it. And I've never had such a beautiful experience. It is so interesting, but each language you sing in has a completely different feeling in the song. It's especially a spiritual song, I feel. It's going into the hearts of the people, and the French heart is very deep. And I don't have it all written in front of me, and I didn't memorize it, but I have it somewhere. But I remember Jesus was translated Jésus, and it was Jesus, your name is as an ointment. Oh my goodness, the entire thing was such a deep, wonderful experience, and I just felt this power and love flowing through me to the beautiful people. And then I felt their love flowing back to me. It was such a special experience. And Mrs. Pincosi and her husband were so grateful for us coming, and we had no idea. She said, "What can we do for you? We want to do something." I said, "No, we don't need anything." "What kind of meal?" I said, "Well, could you make us a hamburger?" We had been abroad for so long. So they went to the boulanger, which is their butcher, and they had him grind up sirloin, top steak, whatever. I have never in my life had a hamburger so delicious. It was absolutely wonderful. And then in that same town, this was late 1970s, we met a couple, the most unique couple, and they were from Iran. They were Iranian, part of the royal family, and they had fled and were hiding out in France, and they had a lot of money, and they took us. They were going to buy a lily bulb factory, and they told us that their names were too hard to pronounce. So she was Patricia and he was Fred. And they were the most wonderful people. They said, you must come to our home. And so she said, come for lunch. Well, when we came for lunch, I am not exaggerating, there was a table that was at least 20 feet long, laden with every conceivable kind of food. They had a little maid there fixing it all for us. And I guess it was true Middle Eastern hospitality. Well, at that time, Fred, her husband, he was suffering with some ailment, a very serious health issue. I never understood exactly what it was, but we said, well, we'll pray for him. So before we left, we all took hands, Fred and Patricia, my sister and I, we took hands and we prayed. And we asked God if he would heal Fred. You know, the Bible says you have not because you ask not. Ask largely that your joy might be full. So I take that. Jesus said we must become as little children to enter the kingdom. So we asked, and then we left it. And then we said our goodbyes, traveled on, went all the way up to Norway and all kinds of places, and came back, finally worked our way back to America. Well, a couple of months later, I was at my parents' home in Tacoma, and a letter comes, and it had that really gorgeous penmanship that these Middle Eastern people developed. They're very artistic, very design colorfully oriented, as the French also are, very much so. And here came the letter. They said, we just want to tell you, we want to thank you so much because Fred went to the doctor and he is well. And the doctor said it's a miracle. He was healed. And so I only say that to give glory to God. And I only say that to encourage you. It wasn't us. It was God that did it. All we did was ask in faith. And that's the secret. If you ask God for something, you must ask in faith. And it says if you ask in faith, nothing wavering, it says in the book of James, don't be double-minded. It says ask in faith, nothing wavering, it shall be done. So I extend to you today that story to encourage you. God is able to meet needs, whether it is a financial need, a spiritual need, a relationship need, a family need, a physical need. God is available. All we have to do is ask. And as I told you before, sit down, take your cup of tea, relax, stop all resistance, and allow Him to love you. Allow Him to meet your need. Thank you so much for joining me today. Each of you are so precious to God. I want you to know that you are His jewels. Sparkle and allow His love to fill your heart. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.